Hey everybody, what's going on? Adam here. In this video, I'm going to go over a chart type that Lorena Torres, a brilliant sports scientist, showed me, and hers is going to be a little bit different than mine, but I think that it's a very valuable visual because it packs a lot of punch into a very small visual space. Pretty much what we're going to do is we are going to display all of an athlete's values for a metric, and we are going to highlight the current one, and we're going to put their average on there too so that we can quickly see where they currently lie in respect to their average while seeing every other single data point that they have. To start this process, we're going to use a function called filter. We actually only need two functions to do this, and well, we need more than two functions, but we just need two cells pretty much with formulas in them to do this whole thing. And to start, we're going to get all of the dates and the metric values that associate with those dates through the filter function. So we'll go equals filter, open parenthesis, and we're going to want all of this data with certain conditions, and we can determine what those conditions are later. But what do we want to bring back? Well, the first thing that we need to bring back are the dates of all the sessions, and then we need to bring back the values for metric 1 and metric 2. To do this, we can go to our chart date or our testing data. We can select our dates, which is our first column. And if you recall from previous videos, we can add multiple columns that are non-adjacent to one another by using curly brackets. So if we do a curly bracket, column 1, we can do a comma and select another column. So let's say we also want CMJ trial 1, comma, and what else? Let's say we also want CMJ trial 2. And we can close the curly bracket. And what this is saying is we're going to bring back these three things when something is true or when a condition is met, comma. And now we can determine what these conditions are. Our condition is going to be, we want to bring back everything for when the player's name in our database is equal to the player that we picked in our dashboard. So we're going to click column A, all the players' name in our database, equal to, and if we go back to our chart data area, we already identify the player that we pick in our dashboard right here, and we can click that player, close the parenthesis, and click enter. And when we do that, we see that we get back the three things that we asked for, and we assume that these are only the values for that player. And that's really all that we need to do for this, if you just want it to be a static thing. If you want to be able to pick the metrics on the fly, then we can do something else. And that's the way that we're going to do it here. So I'm actually going to go to my testing dashboard for a second. I created spaces. This might look a little bit different than the last video because I maneuvered some space to add these charts in so I could show you how to do them. We want metric 1 to be this metric, and we want metric 2 to be this metric, the two metrics that we pick, so that we can change them on the fly. And how we're going to set this up is in our chart data. Under metric 1, we'll say equals, and we will pick the metric that we picked. So in our testing dashboard, we'll select this metric here and click enter. And then in metric 2, we'll go equals and go to our testing dashboard and select the second metric that we pick right here. Click enter. Now, currently this is not right because what we did is we said, okay, we want to get the dates and we want to get CMJ trial 1 and CMJ trial 2. But the metrics that we picked are CMJ average and trap bar deadlift relative strength. So what we need to do in our filter function is we need to use index and match, which we've done throughout this video series a bunch. So we click on this function. Remember, this one function is bringing back all three of these things. Instead of selecting the metric that we want in our database, we can use index and match. So let's just try the first one, or let's try the second one because it'll make more sense because the numbers will be different. So instead of saying we want our testing data column K to K, which is the CMJ trial 2, we want to do index, open parenthesis, and we have a named range called testing data, which has all of our testing data in it. So we want to look for something in there, comma. Now what row do we want to get this from? Well, we don't need to worry about that because our rows are being determined by our filter criteria. We're only getting the rows of whatever data this is that are the rows of the athlete that we pick. Do comma again to get to our column. Now which column do we want? Now to get this we need to use the match function because our column is dynamic. What we need to say is match, open parenthesis, we need to match whatever metric this is, whatever metric we pick, comma, to our testing headers, or the header values in our testing data set. And comma 0, it has to be an exact match, and we can close the parentheses. So now we're saying we want to get the dates, we want to get CMJ trial 1, and then we want to get something in our testing data set, and that something is whatever is in the column that matches, or whatever is in the column where this matches our testing headers, which right now is TBDL relative strength. And if we click enter, now our third item in our list, the dates CMJ trial 1, the third item is dynamic and it is currently the trap bar deadlift relative strength. If we want to apply this to column 2 as well, we can copy our formula here, our index and match, and replace it, or replace our manual column selection with this formula, and just change our match criteria. Because if we click enter, now we're going to get TBDL relative strength twice, because we are matching on this cell in both columns. So for the second one, we want to match to AR4, which is the name of the first metric that we pick, instead of the second one. And if we click enter, now we have the CMJ averages and we have the trap bar relative strength values, and that's great. This is actually pretty much all that we need for the basis of our chart. But we're also going to want to highlight the most recent. I actually forgot to add that in here. So let's just add in 2 columns, and we'll say metric 1 current, and we'll say metric 2 current. This formula, or what this is meant to do, is this is meant to highlight the most recent value. And there are a couple of different ways we can go about this. Let me take a step back for a second. Let's go to our testing dashboard. Right now we have things where we could potentially control the date range, we can control the events that we have, and a bunch of other things. We could integrate these into this formula. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, no matter what, this chart is going to show all this athlete's data from all time, and we're going to highlight the current one. That's important to recognize because I want you to know that you have options. If you wanted to, you can make this adjustable to the date range that you pick, and the events that you pick, and a variety of other things. But that's not what we're going to go over here because the video would be way too long and probably a little bit too complex. So for right now, why I wanted to bring this up is we want to get the maximum date or the latest date of all time, which is in all of these dates. Now we want to find the metric value that coincides with the latest date for this athlete, so that we can highlight it in a different color than the rest of the numbers. I think the easiest way to go about this is to first find the latest date. To find the latest date, we need to consider the metric in question as well. To just find the latest date, we can use a simple function called max. And let's just put this over here for now. Scroll over. Well, equals max, open parenthesis, and just select column AQ where all of our dates are, assuming nothing is underneath, and you shouldn't put anything underneath, and close the parenthesis and click enter. Doesn't look like a date, but let's just quickly format this as a date, wherever date is, and we can see that this is the latest date. Now this is okay, but what if the athlete does not perform the test on that date? So for example, there are some dates here where TBDL relative strength is not present. If TBDL relative strength was not present on this date, finding the maximum date is not that relevant because there is no data for it, for that metric. So we need to consider the metric in question as well and whether or not there is data. To do that, we can use max ifs. So we go equals max ifs, which is just saying we want to get the maximum value with some conditions, or at least one condition. So we'll open up the formula or the function. So we want to get the maximum of, the first thing we need is a range, maximum of all the values in AQ, which are all of our dates, comma, criteria range 1. So for criteria range 1, we want to get all the data for metric 1. And we're going to say for criterion 1, we're going to say when that value or when the criteria range is greater than 0. So we'll select metric 1, which is in column AR, comma, quote, greater than 0, end quote. You need to put quotes around mathematical operators when they're after a comma in formulas in Google Sheets. And we'll close the parenthesis and click enter. And let's also just format this as a date. And we get the same date. That makes sense because this value is greater than 0 and this is the latest date. Let's see what happens if we go into our database and we remove this CMJ average value. So we'll go to our testing data and Trey Sung is the athlete. Here they are. Here's the latest date, 10/17/2020. And this is CMJ1, CMJ2, CMJ3. This is the average, and we know that because there's a formula in here. So let's see what happens when we remove it. I'll remove it from our database, go to our chart data. This value is gone, and if we just use max, notice the date still is 10/17/2020. But this is the actual maximum date where there is data or a value that's greater than 0. So I want to do that first because we're going to integrate this formula inside of this function inside of the formula that we write here. The way that we're going to get the value to highlight is right here. We're going to say equals, or in cell AV5 in my sheet, we're going to say if, open parenthesis, say if this date is equal to this date, or the maximum date where the value of metric 1 is greater than 0, comma, if that's true, then we want to get the value of metric 1. Comma, if that's not true, then we want to do quote, quote, or make it blank. Close the parenthesis and click enter. However, we don't want to have this cell be the maximum date. We don't want this cell to be here. So we can take the formula that we wrote to get this maximum date, go into our formula right here, and say instead of saying if this date is equal to this date, we can say if this date is equal to our formula that creates this date. So we'll paste it in. If this date is equal to the maximum date in this column where the value of metric 1 is greater than 0, then let's get the value of metric 1. If not, then let's make it blank. And I have two equal signs here, sorry about that. And we will click enter. And now we can copy this formula and paste it to the bottom of our sheet. Scroll up. And there we have the latest value, or we have the value for the latest date where the metric 1, or the metric that we pick, is greater than 0. We can copy this formula and paste it over for metric 2. Copy it and paste it over. The only thing that we need to change is instead of looking at AR, or column AR and AR5, which is where metric 1 lives, we change this to be AS and AS5. So let's change AR to AS, AR to AS5. Now we're saying that if this date equals the maximum date when AS, or metric 2, is greater than 0, then give us metric 2. If not, make it blank. We can click enter. Then we can copy this formula and paste it to the bottom of our sheet. And scroll up. And there we have it, right? We have a value here. This is the latest date, and there's a value. Perfect. And because we integrated the max ifs into our formula, we can remove this cell. We don't need it anymore. And we don't need this one either. That was for demonstration. But I removed a CMJ average from here. So what I want to do is I want to add it back in. I'm just going to go to my testing data, find Trey Sung, and I'm just going to copy the formula and paste it there again so that we get the average back for that date. And if we go back to our chart data now we have a different value show up here, which is appropriate. And that's perfect. Now we have values that we can highlight and use in our chart for us to quickly identify where the athlete currently is and where that fits within all of their data. The last two things that we need to do are, 1, calculate an average for each metric, and 2, just do this thing called ones, which I'll explain in a second. Or I'll explain as we're creating the chart. To get the average for metric 1, we can go equals average, open parenthesis, and we can just select column AR and close the parenthesis and click enter. And we can copy this formula and paste it over to get the average for metric 2. Because now we're looking at column AS. Great, and in case I didn't mention it enough times already, when we do these things that have dynamic, so these dates, if we had 100 dates, we would have 100 rows. When we create an area to set up charts for this type of stuff, I never put things underneath because you don't know how many dates you're going to have. And it gets confusing when you're looking at it in kind of like a box format. So it's assumed that with these formulas, there's nothing going underneath that is another chart or something like that. Now we can do our ones formula. Essentially what this does is it's going to say when a date is here, make sure that there's a 1 in this column. If a date isn't there, then don't worry about it. And we can go equals if, open parenthesis, if this date is greater than 0, comma 1. If that's not true, comma, quote, quote, or blank. Close the parenthesis and click enter. And now, again, we have two options. We can copy this and paste it down to the bottom of our sheet. Or, if you prefer, we can turn this into an array formula. All we have to do is change AQ5 to AQ5:AQ, and then hold down Control, Shift, and click enter, or Command, Shift, and enter if you're on a Mac, and click enter. Now we have an error. That's because there are things blocking its way. There are things blocking the array formula from doing its job. And you'll get a similar error if you put something in the way of this filter function. So if I put the number 1 here, we're going to get errors. Because it's saying, hey, like we have this function here that's supposed to be in that cell, and you're blocking us. So we can remove that 1, and if we remove these formulas here, now, again, we just have one formula here, and it's applying for every row. We'll just make that yellow again. That's kind of, for me, I'm like, okay, these are array formulas. That's what's going on here. The last piece of this is creating the chart. And that's probably the easiest part of this. The styling and stuff will be up to you, but let's go through this. First step is we can just select this data. I think this is probably the quickest way, and we'll just go insert chart. And it'll give us, Google Sheets will give us its best guess at what we want. We're actually going to do a specific chart. We want a scatter plot. So let's click this scatter chart. It might not make that much sense right now. For our x-axis, we're going to use this ones column, this ones thing here. So we can click on add x-axis, select data range, and we'll select this cell, AX4:AX, which means go to the bottom of our sheet. We can click OK. And now look what happens to the dots. They all line up in the center. That's what we want. Ideally, I would have this horizontal. I think that a horizontal orientation would be better. And you'll see what I mean a little bit later. And because this is essentially the only way that I know how to do it in Google Sheets. I've tried a bunch of other ways. This is the way that I have to do it now. If you know how to orient this horizontally, in the end of this, like let me know, and I'll try to implement that. But so we have AX4 to AX1000. We're just going to change this CMJ average range that we have here to be AR4 to AR so that it aligns. And now what we can do is we can select the average. So we can add a series. And this series will be the average for our metric 1, which will be AT, I guess we'll start with AT4 colon AT and click OK. Now we have another dot. And let's give this a header in 4. Let's just call this AVG for average. We can actually do that again for average 2, which we'll get to later. We can do this for current, and we'll do current again, and we can leave that blank. So now we have the average with all the other data points. And if we edit the chart again and add another series, click on select data range, and we select current for metric 1, which is AV4 colon AV, and click OK. Now we have the current value as well. Great. Now I'm going to work on styling this chart a little bit. So, whoa, I don't know what just happened there, but let's make this skinny. And so why are the ones here? The ones are here so that all these points align in the same, align together. If we had different numbers here, then they would be all scattered about along across the x-axis. But this is intentional because it takes up a little bit of space when we do it like this. I might remove this, and I'm going to make the font, clicking on these cells, I'll make the label font size maybe 10. Here on the x-axis, we'll make the text color white. I think the grid lines are fine. I don't want the vertical grid lines though, so let's maybe make those white also so I can't see them. And actually I don't like these grid lines either, so I'm also going to make them, I'm actually going to take these away entirely because I don't need anything on the bottom here. I'm going to remove the header, and now it's starting to come together a little bit more. I'm going to click on the legend, and we can make the legend font size 10, or as small as it can go. Maybe we decrease the size of this area as well, and we can maybe make this even smaller, right? Like we can get really, really granular here. Now, I'm going to click on the first series, and I'm just going to style it a little bit. So all these points, I don't need them to stand out. Depending on how many data points you have, you might do this in different ways, but I might have it be this grayish color and the point size only be 2. And for the average, I might make that a different shape. So I clicked on the average icon. I might make this shape be an X. And for their current, I might make this, I mean, that might be fine as is. But now I just want to change the color. So I'll make this gold. I'll make the X green. And you can make this X, I might make the X also bigger. So let's maybe make it 14. It's a big X. Now we can kind of see where the athlete lives relative to their average. In this chart, we can see where they've also fit before. The other chart styling things I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the chart. We'll go to Customize, Chart Style. Let's remove the background color, remove the chart border, say Maximize. Maximize actually might work well here, so I'm just going to click on Maximize for now and Compare Mode. And what that should allow us to do is, I mean, it doesn't show up in this chart here because it's not big enough, but if it was a little bit wider, we could see all these data points if we wanted to. Let's bring this back in. Let's bring this back in. And I'm actually, because this is annoying, I'm going to edit this chart and customize. I'm going to get rid of the maximize, and I'm going to get rid of the compare mode. And now from here, we can copy this chart. And notice, one thing that I want you to notice here is, actually, let me bring these points, let me bring them back up to size. And if we make this longer, well, I try to make it longer. Let's bring this. Right, you can see that the more vertical space we get it, the more dispersed the points are and the easier it is to understand. So I would only use this chart if there was a lot of vertical space somewhere, like I might have a bunch of charts side by side with this information. That's why, and actually you'll see I'll explain it in a couple minutes. But let's bring these points back down to point size 2. He'll bring this point even down to a point size 2. And actually, I'm going to bring this x back down to a 7. And now let's copy this chart. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I know that my space on my dashboard, there's not a lot of vertical space. It's very constrained. So I wouldn't actually like use this chart in this circumstance with this spacing. That's why I actually wanted it to be horizontally aligned, is because I think it's easier to align horizontal charts in this format. I would need a lot of vertical space to pull off this chart, which I don't have, so it might look kind of weird when we copy and paste it into the dashboard. But here, all right, so we have that. We copied it. I'm going to paste it. Here's our second chart. And what we can do here is we can just switch the metrics. So if we edit it, let's edit this chart, and let's just change CMJ average. We'll select a different data range from AR4 to AR. Now we want AS4 to AS, which has our TBDL metric. So we'll go AS4 to AS. Click OK. And then we'll change our average. Now it's not AT4 to AT, it's AU4 to AU. So we can change this. Instead of AT4, we'll go AU4 to AU. Click OK. And for current, it's no longer AV4 to AV, it's AW4 to AW. So we can edit this and go AW4 to AW. And click OK. And notice again, like we can see the differences here. We can see this person is well below their average. They've only had one worse performance. In this one, they're slightly below average, and they've had 3 worse performances. But let's copy our first chart, and let's go to our testing dashboard, and I'm going to paste it in here and make it so it fits in the space. And actually, let me see if I can. Did I already? The font size is already as small as it can go. Nope, that won't do it. It needs to be a little bit wider. Okay, there. So that's one chart. And notice we can see they're pretty much on average for this. But when we look at our chart data and we expand it out, we can see that they're well below the average. It kind of depends on how big the vertical axis is. So I'm trying to make this chart bigger, and Google Sheets is messing with me right now. So I'll do that later. Now what we can do is we can copy our second chart that we have, which is this one. Copy it, go to our testing dashboard, paste it, and we can just make it align with all this stuff. This one we can more clearly see that it's below the average, but again, it's difficult to tell. So in this context, it might not provide a lot of value, but if you had it in a different area, for example, if you had more vertical space to work with, like this, you can make things a little bit bigger, and it might make a little bit more sense. That's it. I like this chart, and I wish that I could horizontally align it, which I currently do not know how to do. But maybe someday. Maybe someday I'll be able to get to it. For now, keep it like this. And at least we can change this box. Let's change it. Sorry, I'm off on a thing now. I want to get it away from the legend and down towards the bottom. If I can make this a little bit wider. Make this a little bit wider. Sorry, you can tell I'm a little bit I don't really know what I want here, so I'm just kind of screwing around, making it a little bit wider here. And that's fine for me for now. If I just adjust these boxes a little bit more. And I guess a couple of other things that you might consider are just blowing them up. So I'm just going to select all this data. We can make them size 0.7, and maybe we make the fill opacity 50 so that they're kind of see-through. It could even be 30 for all of these historical records where we can kind of see them. But I'm going to keep it at 50, and maybe we do click on the X. Oops, I'm trying to just click on the average. And here we have it. Maybe again, let's just make it 14, a big X. Or 10. 10 might be fine. And what we might be able to do here is we can add a data label to make it easier. And we can make that data label, we can move it over to the right. We can also make it size 0.10 so it's small. Move it over to the right. And what we might decide to do in our data is, or we can just change it here if we want to make it other custom formats 0.00 and click apply. And we can do the same thing with our current data. We can add a data label if we want. Maybe we bring that one again to we'll make it 10 points. Bring it to the right. Now we have some overlap that causes some confusion. Maybe this one's to the left. And again, we'll make this we'll go to other custom formats, go to 0.00, 2 decimals. Now we can see, okay, there's the average. There's the current, and here's everything else. And we could do that same thing with this other chart too if we wanted to. So let's make the fill opacity 50 for the non-current items, 7 points. Click on the current one. We'll make this also 7 points. And add a data label. With this data label, we can move it to the left. We will make it 10-point font, and we will make this another custom format, 0.00, and we'll do the same thing with the X again. So I believe we went to 10 points, add a data label, bring it over to the right, and make the label font size 10, and we will change the formatting to 0.00. Sorry if I'm moving a little bit fast. I know this video has already been long. And now maybe this is a little bit easier to read, given the space constraints that we have. But again, I advise if you're going to do a chart like this, either if it's going to be horizontally aligned, then have a lot of horizontal space to do it. If it's vertically aligned, have more vertical space to do it, so that the segregation between data points is a little bit more clear. At least, and you're going to have to understand also the clinically meaningful difference between these things to appreciate the differences that you see in the chart. So depending on what you determine to be a meaningful difference, you might organize it in a different way. Just want to make sure this is 7 points. This is being hidden. No, it's not. So I need to make that 7 points also. Cool. And that's all I got for this video. I hope it was helpful, even though it might not necessarily be contextually appropriate. Maybe you have a use for it in your environment. I like the visual. Again, it's a lot of data. We see every single jump CMJ average this person has. We see where they're at right now. We see what their average is. And because each data point is represented, we can see where that fits and what the variability is in their jumping performance. That's the key thing, is this allows you to see variability quickly in a visually appealing way. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And yeah, great work in this entire series. I really appreciate you being along for this ride. I hope that it has been helpful. And yep, there are going to be a ton more videos out where we do different things working with this framework. So stay tuned to learn more about monitoring, dealing with exports, creating strength and conditioning programs off of this, and other things. Those will be coming out at later dates. So watch this space, and I'm excited to see you in other videos.